We're going to do some probability notes. It'll be easier if you have a copy of this that you've printed or written, but if you just want to follow along, that's fine too. When we talk about probability, what we're talking about really is how likely is an event to happen. And we look at this scale, or the fancy word continuum, that goes from impossible all the way up to certain. And we call this area in the middle equally likely. Anything that falls between impossible and equally likely we call unlikely, meaning it can happen, but probably not. And then between equally likely and certain, we just call it likely. It'll probably happen. And the common name for equally likely, when you're just talking about it, most people are more likely to say something like 50-50. You have a 50-50 chance of something happening. And 50-50, it really comes from the idea of 50%. So if something is equally likely to happen, it has a 50% chance of happening. If it's impossible, 0% chance. And if it's certain, we would say it has a 100% chance of happening. We also sometimes write probabilities as fractions. So 0 would still be 0. 50% is 1/2. And 100% would just be considered 1. We can fill in some of these points in the middle with 25% or 1/4. And we could do over here 75% or 3/4. A lot of probability problems look something like this. What are the chances the spinner will land on B? We use this fancy formula to figure out the probabilities. So when we're finding probability, we use a fraction, and the numerator is always the number of favorable outcomes. And it's divided by the denominator, which is the number of total outcomes. And that sounds confusing, but it really isn't. So we look at what are the chances it will land on B? Well, how many spaces on this spinner have a B? Just this one. So there's only one favorable outcome, so I will write it as 1. How many total outcomes? Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 total outcomes. So I would write my probability as 1/4. And I know that 1/4 is also 25% or 0.25. If I was going to put it on a number line, it would go right here. I'm going to finish filling out my number line. Okay, now we're going to look at the second part of this problem. And now we're being asked, what is the likelihood that the spinner will not land on D? So I have to figure out the number of favorable outcomes. Well, I want it to not land on D. So there's 1, 2, 3 favorable outcomes where it will not land on D. So that's my numerator. And my total outcomes is still 4. So it's going to be 3/4 or 75% or 0.75. Let me fix my 4. It looks really weird. And so it would go right here on the continuum. So try finishing these last 3 problems on your own.